Hi guys, it's LPJ Models. Today I'm going to be building the Meng 135 Whippet, First World War British tank. It was the fastest tank of the First World War, reaching up to 8 miles an hour, and its design paved the way for future generations of armour. The kit comes moulded in a tan plastic. It has some nice rivet and surface detail as well. One of the interesting design features of this kit is some of the plastic moulded armour plates have to be bent into shape. Luckily, this was fairly straightforward, and with some careful dry fitting you can get the parts to match up nicely. The chain and drive sprocket are nicely moulded. It's a shame it won't be seen when everything's finished. These ejector pin marks will be visible when the model's finished, so they needed to be fixed. These were sanded carefully away. I brushed over some slow drying ultra thin cement to level off the area. These were then sanded with some ultra fine 2000 grit sandpaper to level everything off. I had a little trouble getting these parts together because of the alignment of the return rollers. If I were to build the kit again, I'd glue them in place first. I used Mr. Cement Deluxe glue that has a longer working time to glue these parts into place. If you're careful when gluing the machine gun mounts to the hull, you can allow the machine guns to move freely. The tracks, after being removed and cleaned up from the sprues, were really easy to assemble. The only bad point is, the attachment points are very delicate. If you take care, you'll get a fully workable set of tracks. Individual track links are one of the reasons I tend to avoid armour. Luckily, Meng had made the process fairly painless. The exhausts were drilled out with a 1.2mm drill bit to add more depth to them. I used some fine beading cord to emulate the asbestos rope around the exhaust pipes. Unfortunately, when painted this turned a bit fluffy, so I'd use something different next time. Now with the building out of the way, it's on to my favourite part, the painting. I started the process by spraying on 2 medium coats of Mission Models grey primer. As primers go, Mission Models primer is easy to work with. It's forgiving and tough. I mixed up a dark base coat for black basing out of Mission Models Black and Mission Models Propeller Brown. This will give me some nice depth on which to build up some shading. For my shadow coat, I mixed Mission Models RAF Dark Green, Russian Dark Olive Faded and RAF Light Earth. I decided to add the brown to the paint mix to make the green a bit more muted. I started adding some highlights with Russian Dark Olive Faded and RAF Light Earth. At this stage, because the colour was so close to the shadow coat, I decided to freehand it for a more natural appearance. It's easier to spray light coats and build up the effect you want and have to go back over with the shadow colour. As the paint goes down, you can see I'm building up a modulated effect. I added some Mission Models RLM04 Gelb to the previous mix and started working in some more highlights. That yellow thing is a post-it note. They're great for quick and easy masking on the fly. I added even more yellow to my previous paint mix. At this stage, because the highlights are a lot brighter, I decided to mask off for some crisp lines. I finished off the modulation with some pure yellow, sprayed in ultra thin, ultra light coats. The white for the insignia flashes was sprayed with Tamer white, thinned with Mr. Colour levelling thinner. I added a touch of dark grey to tone down the brilliance of the white. The red areas were masked, matching a reference picture I had seen. They were sprayed with Vallejo Dark Vermilion. With the R-Tool Texture Effect stencil, I sprayed on some more tonal variation with a very thin mix of black and brown. All the rivets and raised areas of the model were picked out with a lightened version of the base coat. This might look a bit bizarre now, but after weathering it will tone down and add some more interest to the model. The first layer of chipping was done with Vallejo Grey-Green. This was applied with a sponge. Remember when chipping with a sponge to remove most of the paint on a paper towel, or you might end up with some unsightly blobs. The next colour I used for chipping was Vallejo German Camouflage Black-Brown. This was applied with a sponge and a brush. Once the chipping was done, it was time for a clear coat. I used Alclad Aquagloss and sprayed 2 medium coats over the whole model. I find a good clear coat useful for applying decals and pin washes later on. I found the decals of this kit a little bit brittle, especially on those that were being placed over rivets. I used Mr. Mark Setter to help the decals adhere to the model, and Mr. Mark Softer to help them conform to any rough surfaces. When dry, the decals were sealed in with another layer of Alclad Aquagloss. For the next stage of the weathering, I used a pin wash to pick out all the details over the model. I used a mix of burnt umber and French ultramarine artist oils. Black can look too stark, so this mix is a good compromise. Here you can see the gloss surface helping the wash to pull around the details. Once the wash had dried, I airbrushed a matte coat of Winsor & Newton Artist Matte Varnish. I then added some more highlights, using lemon yellow and sap green artist oils. This was then blended with a soft sable brush using household white spirit. The tracks were base coated with a mix of Mission Models grey primer and black. This provides a nice mid-tone to paint and weather over. Life Colour liquid pigment Deep Rust was speckled over the tracks. This was then washed in varying intensities over the entire track surface. I mixed the reactivatable Wilder Aquiline Dry Earth with a few various earth shades and painted this on the tracks. This is great as you can tidy it up if you get it anywhere you don't want. The graphite stick was used to emulate worn metal surfaces on the tracks. I used my favourite mix of French ultramarine and burnt umber artist oils to pick out all the rivets on the tracks. I then mixed various earth shades to emulate light dust build-up. After the tracks were mounted, they were speckled with various grime, mud and dust colours. I mixed a deep rust colour from artist oils and painted this over the exhaust. The asbestos rope was painted with Vallejo ivory. This was then shaded and dirtied up with oils. Whilst the oil paint on the exhaust was still wet, I stippled on some Mink Pigment Standard Rust. Using light colours of artist oils, I washed around the details on the lower hull of the tank. Using the Abteiling 502 engine grease, I added some light engine streaks to the engine deck. These were blended with a soft brush and white spirit. I then used AK Wash for grease and bearings to add more engine oil and grime to the engine deck. Using yellow ochre, burnt umber and titanium white oil paint, I mixed up a dusty mud colour. This was then stippled along the areas of the tank that were more likely to get dusty. After an hour or so, when the thinness had evaporated, I stippled it with a soft brush to blend it in. I added more grease and grime in logical locations along the lower hull. For more texture and variation along the running gear, I speckled dark mixes of oil paints. I think the little splashes of mud and grime really bring the tank to life. The technique I used for the track spuds was the same as the floor in my Eindecker video. These were painted in artist oils and the paint mostly removed with a stiff brush. These were glued in place with super glue. I used the graphite stick to emulate some worn edges on the tank. This was then reapplied to the tracks to reinstate any graphite that had come off earlier. And there we have it, my first armour build on YouTube. Please let me know in the comments if you want to see more armour builds. If you've enjoyed the video, please give me a like and subscribe. Here's a slideshow of the finished model. I'm James Can, this has been LPJ Models. Thanks for watching.